Avenues and appeal Tuesday's Supreme Court ruling, which criticized the government for failing to arrest Sudan's President Omar Al-Bashir during an African Union meeting last year.
That's the advice from an international law expert and executive director of the International Bar Association, Mark Ellis. Ellis welcomed the ruling, saying it shows the International Criminal Court has universal jurisdiction for international crimes. The ICC issued an arrest warrant for President Al-Bashir in 2009 for alleged war crimes in Darfur. Our correspondent in London, Catherine Drew, spoke to Ellis earlier.
Clearly, South Africa's decision, the Supreme Court's decision, I think is an important, not only an important decision, but I think could set a precedent for other countries, particularly in Africa, who have in the past permitted al-Bashir to visit, even though they are state parties to the Rome Statute. And so I think it's much more difficult now for these states to say, well, we're in essence following past practices because we were a bit confused about whether this head of state immunity still existed. The South African Supreme Court has made it clear that it does not exist. It does not apply to state parties of the Rome Statute. And so I'm hoping that this will make it much more difficult for other states to ignore this principle.
Now, the government in Pretoria is reviewing this ruling and has yet to decide whether to launch an appeal to the Constitutional Court. Is that something you think they could win, or in your mind, are the legal principles clear-cut?
Well, first, my sense is that they will appeal it. They probably should appeal it because I think in the end these are constitutional matters. But I think the Supreme Court's decision is very clear. It's crystal clear.
So you would advise the government to appeal to the Constitutional Court, even though you think they would lose the case?
If I was advising the government, even though I would say that the decision of the Supreme Court is the right decision, I think it's legally very sound, that I would say, well, yes, it's a constitutional matter, and I think it's probably the responsibility of the government to, in fact, appeal. I'd like to see it because I'm confident the Constitutional Court would uphold the decision of the appeals of the Supreme Court, and therefore all legal grounds would then be covered.
This ruling has renewed debate within South Africa about withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. Is that a straightforward process?
I think that would be a huge mistake on South Africa's part. One, because I think South Africa is seen internationally as still a beacon for a country that emerged from conflict and that has embraced not only the rule of law, but principles of justice and accountability. And therefore, South Africa really should be leading the way in supporting these principles, not retreating from them.
Obviously, you've had a great deal of experience with the International Criminal Court. Do you think there is a bias against African nations?
The reality is the situations, the cases that are in front of the ICC, with the exception of the Al-Bashir case, which was referred to by the Security Council, are cases that in essence were brought by African states. However, their perception that it is biased does ring true to me when you look at the number of countries who are not state parties. So the United States, Russia, China, Israel, countries that clearly one could, I think, objectively look at and say, well, they have been engaged allegedly with crimes that could very well have been part of the court's jurisdiction. Why are they not part of this mechanism? And it's because of the way it was created that you have to sign up as state parties. But I think it does reflect poorly on these states, and it does, I think, legitimately question whether or not truly we have a universal system of justice when some of the major superpower states are simply not part of it. And so that, I think, is a very legitimate complaint. I would rather see us continue to build up the acceptance for these states to eventually become state parties rather than to retreat from this concept of international justice.
That was SABC correspondent in London, Catherine Drew, speaking to international law expert Dr. Mark Ellis.